Matt. Hello to our audience online, and thank you everyone here for showing up. I am Patrice Flowers, the director of the Center for Indo-Pacific Affairs here in the College of Languages, Arts and Literature at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And our center is focused on policy relevant research in traditional and non-traditional security. Today we are welcoming Dr. Elise Rainer from American Public University and the University of Washington to give us a talk today on foreign aid, democracy, and global security. Dr. Rainer has her PhD in international studies from the University of Washington. Previous to that, she was working at the State Department, a diplomat there, working mostly on diplomacy, governance, and human rights. And she went on from there and has had many experiences from working with the United Nations, from founding her own consultancy, doing project evaluation for USAID. And so in addition to being an academic, she's also a practitioner. So I wanted to welcome you to the University of Hawaii.
Thank you so much. Oh, wow.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome.
So beautiful. Thank you so much. Oh my goodness, I feel so honored. Thank you for having me. Again, my name is Dr. Elise Rainer, and I just want to thank Dr. Flowers for the invitation to come be here today, and also the Center for Indo-Pacific Affairs. This lovely invitation to be able to come to the University of Hawaii and meet with you all today. And hello to everyone online. I was really grateful for this invitation. I want to start by saying that I received it in early February. And the world and I had just watched as the sign for USAID had been taken down. And I worked there almost 20 years ago now, and I worked in democracy and governance as well as in the State Department. So we're watching an unraveling of kind of a stable foreign policy, US foreign policy priority from the last 60 plus years. So I was so grateful to receive this invitation and have an opportunity to discuss this, to talk about it, to really process and have a public forum about what are the implications of this and potentially what is lost too from this change. So by way of that, I titled my talk today, Foreign Aid, Democracy, and Global Security. All right, well, this is what I plan to talk about. Here is the outline of my presentation, give you an overall understanding of what I'll discuss. I really want to kind of give the broad picture. Hi, welcome. The broad picture of foreign aid. So today I'll talk about who gives aid, and then importantly to really provide context that this is far beyond just outside of the United States government. It's not just USAID, and it's not just governments. So we'll talk about who gives aid. And then we'll talk about what is international democracy, human rights, and governance assistance. This is rather obscure work to a lot of people, so we'll go over what does this look like in a practical way, what are some programs, and how is this implemented all over the world. We'll talk about when this industry began, a little bit of the history of it, and then where does it go? Recipient countries. Again, what does this look like? Democracy and governance assistance around the world. And then finally, why? And I'll spend a lot of time today talking about the why. Why do countries give aid? And I want to cover three main drivers of the why. First of all, humanitarian. First and foremost, humanitarian goodwill. A lot of people, over 311 million people, I looked up as of August 2024, according to the United Nations, rely on humanitarian aid every day. So this is clean water, food assistance, basic human needs. Millions and millions of people. Why countries give foreign aid is also due to economic reasons. More stable countries are better trade partners. That's just a summary of the fundamental principle of it. And then last, looking at security grounds. So stable countries are more secure countries. So I'm trying to put my argument right up front that if you leave today, this is what the fundamental argument I want you to understand from this talk. That foreign aid is not simply charity. It is in the interest of countries to provide economic support to improve their own trade ties. It is also in their interest for security, because more secure societies improves regional and global security. All right, so that's the argument that I will try to weave through today. And I'll end by talking about case studies of the long-term benefits of foreign aid, namely Japan and South Korea, again, focusing on Indo-Pacific countries here in Hawaii. All right, so then going to who gives foreign aid, let's talk about this first. Because again, setting the stage, this is not just a conversation about the United States. So here I have a picture. Australia is a large donor to the Asia-Pacific region. South Africa is a large donor to the sub-Saharan African region. There's many, many countries around the world that give aid. Almost all high-income countries in today's world give some sort of foreign aid. So on the left here, you see these are the highest donors: the United States, Germany, Japan, United Kingdom, France, Canada, and Italy. Those are currently before February. And these numbers all come from the Council on Foreign Relations. On the right-hand side of your screen, you're seeing this, that I want to really emphasize this. This is talking about proportion of GDP. So yes, the United States is the highest donor of foreign aid in actual numbers, in actual dollars. This is often dollars. But in proportion, the highest donors of foreign aid tend to be the Scandinavian countries, Netherlands, kind of Northern European countries. And you'll see here, Germany, for example, gives 0.9% of its GDP. I hope you all can see this. I want to emphasize this. The United States gives 0.2% of its GDP. Not 30%, not some of the wild numbers that you maybe have heard in the news discussed. So of the United States GDP, only 0.2% is going to foreign aid, as opposed to other countries that give about 1% of their GDP, as you know, almost 10 times higher proportionally than the United States. All right, so again, the purpose here is to highlight that the foreign aid project is a global project. It goes far beyond the United States. So far, now next, I've talked about governments, and now I want to discuss multilateral institutions, nonprofits, and private organizations who are really significant foreign aid donors. All right, so multilateral institutions, who are large players here? The World Food Program, Asian Development Bank, these are just some examples of foreign aid multilateral institutions. European Union, UN Women, and the African Union. Nonprofits, Doctors Without Borders, Save the Children, International Rescue Committee, and Care International. These are some examples of nonprofits. They're huge players in the world of foreign aid. The work that Doctors Without Borders does is really significant to health outcomes in some countries, just as an example. And then private organizations and foundations. I'm from Seattle, and the Gates Foundation has a larger budget than some European countries. I think it's larger than Luxembourg and other small countries in their foreign aid budget. So as a private foundation, the Gates Foundation is a huge player in the world of foreign aid, especially in like vaccine delivery, polio, malaria is what it's focused on. All right, so I'm trying to go outside the United States and give you the kind of global picture here. But then with this next one, I'm gonna go back to the United States because it is really important, biggest player in the world. And to understand what is this? What is the US foreign assistance going towards? I think people sometimes think of, kids in war. That's a good thing to think of with humanitarian aid, but it's so much more than that. It's so much more than that. So what I have here is this graph that shows actually our highest. So as of 2025, this is from the Pew Research Center. Out of $71 billion is about USAID's budget. 27% was for economic development. I think that often surprises people. That's not something that comes to people's mind readily when they're thinking about foreign aid. So that's, loans to farmers. It's helping, here I have an example. It's giving funding to women's collectives. It's working on economic development and assistance to various countries. What else? Then next comes health. Actually, this box here. So after 27% of economic development, then 22%, our next highest, is in health. And this is kind of the what you think of the vaccines, the malaria nets, the polio vaccinations. This is the traditional healthcare services in rural areas where the state doesn't necessarily provide it, say in Ethiopia or Nigeria or a place like that. Next, humanitarian assistance, which is actually, just slightly lower than health, which is, I think, a remarkable. This is humanitarian assistance is, again, that basic needs. That's the building clean water, accessibility. It's providing food and food assistance to children in Sudan, Congo, things like this, the real basic needs in humanitarian assistance. All right, and last here that I want to focus on today, we've got 3 others, and then here. I want to focus here in this democracy, human rights, and governance sector, which the United States spends 3.2% of its foreign aid budget on. So not huge numbers, but to put that in perspective, the US is still the wealthiest country in the world. And so at 3.2% of our foreign aid budget, the United States still is the largest player in this sector, is the largest donor to the democracy, human rights, and governance space. And I said I'm going to say it today. I'm not going to speak in past tense. These numbers are going to be outdated as of next year, but this is the status as of 60 years. So this, I'm trying to explain and give you kind of the very big picture of what we have and potentially what is being lost. Okay, so again, this is where I want to focus my talk, is this 3.2%. It's a really small proportion of USAID's budget, and also broader democracy assistance outside of USAID, State Department, a little bit of Department of Defense towards this, but it's still a huge player. So here's a slide to help you understand what is this? What does this mean when I talk about international democracy, human rights, and governance assistance? This has been my career for about 20 years working on this. And outside of DC, I do find it's hard for many people in the public to understand what does this mean? What are we doing? What are we supporting? So here, looking at Indo-Pacific affairs, I thought, why don't we look at Taiwan? It's in the news today. Here's an example. I invite you to think of Taiwan as a really good case study of democracy and human rights assistance. In this picture, we see an example of activists. We see an example of democracy activists and human rights, but mainly coming out and advocating for political freedoms and human rights in Taiwan. These are examples of the type of protesters who have received a great deal of funding and foreign assistance support for issues such as political advocacy, freedom of association, training journalists, and beyond. All right, so that's just kind of to give you the context in Taiwan. That's really timely, especially even today. But then beyond Taiwan, let's look at globally. The US would give human rights and democracy funding to, for example, support human rights defenders. This is supporting political prisoners all around the world. I used to work in Jordan, and we would work with trying to get political prisoners out of jail. Human rights activists setting up safe houses for advocates under threat. I just heard a really good example from NPR that I thought would illustrate this point. So NPR was interviewed a Cambodian human rights defender. He is currently living in a US-funded safe house for human rights defenders. So you can think of this as almost like a domestic violence shelter for human rights defenders who are often hunted and threatened by authoritarian regimes. In February 2025, NPR interviewed this Cambodian man who recently found out that the US would close the safe house at the end of the month, where he was living with his wife and children. He is a member of an outlawed Cambodian opposition party. Him and his wife and their children and their 3 kids were informed that they would have to leave the safe house at the end of the month due to the US funding cut. He told NPR that he was really worried that it was going to make it much easier for the police to find and arrest him. When he first learned that there would be no more funding for this and he'd have to leave the safe house, he said, "I think my heart is broken. My soul is out of my body." So this funding goes to really protect frontline human rights defenders who are often under direct threat from oppressive government authorities. Next, the funding goes towards rule of law and training lawyers and judges in anti-corruption reforms. It goes to fund civil society, and to give you a sense, many hundreds of organizations around the world, women's rights organizations, environmental organizations, youth organizations, persons with disabilities, LGBTI groups are funded through foreign assistance. So this is a very strange thing for a lot of Americans to conceptualize, but as of last year, the United States was the largest funder to LGBTI local civil society groups globally. So in Jamaica, in Uganda, when small, tiny organizations were seeking to organize and become a registered civil society, the embassy would provide funds or could, there's a whole application process. But the United States would support globally, all around the world, many LGBTI human rights organizations. That's just one example. But again, a whole swath of women's rights, children, youth, many human rights issues. So then finally, the funding goes towards training journalists and to support the media. This one's actually very difficult in a lot of countries. I worked in Tunisia and Egypt and Morocco for a while, and it's very difficult in a lot of countries to enact freedom of expression and freedom of the press. So it's really important to train journalists in how to establish and have the institution of a free press. All right, so then looking at the history of democracy and human rights assistance, I think this is really important to kind of back up and say, where does this all come from? Why did we start doing this? This is pretty new for governments, in a historical perspective. It's pretty new for governments to support human rights and democracy outside of their own countries. So where this all comes from is World War II. And when Europe was in ruins, and formerly leaders had impunity under laws of sovereignty, leaders could essentially do whatever they wanted to their own people. As long as they weren't messing with their neighbors, as long as they weren't hurting populations across the borders, they could genocide their Christians. They could round up their ethnic minorities. This happened a lot, the Armenians in Turkey. It was really World War II that the international community said, we need to step in when a leader comes in and looks like he's going to, and I say he there, but when a leader comes in and looks like it's either going to be genocide or some sort of major human rights and democracy issue. After World War II, countries decided, no, we need to actually be involved. We need to step in. This will impact our own country. It will impact the region and impact the globe. So then what happens is that in 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is signed. And this really still to this day really shapes this whole industry. It sets out what a government, it defines governmental power, what a government must allow. I think that's really important, not just what it doesn't, what a government cannot do, but what a government must allow. For example, to allow citizens to travel, have citizenship, education, the right to housing and health care. And then, of course, what a government cannot do. And, kind of the lowest common denominator, what governments are not allowed to do. In the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, for example, it forbids authorities from taking life, liberty, or property from citizens without due process of law. So, really, again, to this day, this is still this foundational document to international human rights norms that we still see today. But I want to address it has some challenges that remain for the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's normative and prescriptive. It's not legally binding and not necessarily consistent with the views and practices of what some of the signatory nations do in practice, as we see examples of today. All right, so we go from World War II, when this whole industry kind of comes about, and then we see accelerated after the Cold War, the democracy sector really blossoms. And in the early 1980s, US Congress created the National Endowment for Democracy and its partner organizations. The idea was to strengthen democratic institutions and really set up the infrastructure for democracy. So we think of infrastructure as like roads and buildings and systems, but out of this, and even under Ronald Reagan's leadership, it was setting up the infrastructure of democracy. And so I included pictures here. You'll see the International Republican Institute, IRI, used to be connected to the parties, but no longer. National Democratic Institute, National Endowment for Democracy. These are just examples. There are hundreds of organizations that work for democracy, human rights, and governance all around the world. I'll come back because I worked with NDI, National Democratic Institute, and a few others. That's who I worked with in Nigeria and Ethiopia. All right, so getting more to my work, we'll here understand where does democracy and human rights foreign aid go. And so this is really examples of recipient countries and examples from my recent work. In fact, we'll start here in Nigeria. And this program is so recent, it became a casualty of the recent executive orders, and we were working on it still, and we were told to stop working on it on a Tuesday. So, this is really fresh work that I'll reference now to talk to you about what does this look like in practice, the implementation of democracy and human rights foreign aid. So this was an example. This program in Nigeria was a Women, Peace, and Security project. And it was with an organization called Equal Access International. The program helped bring more women and youth into local security dialogues and increase their political participation in community security structures. I know that sounds kind of mouthy, but it was getting women and youth involved in the decision-making of their communities. In this context of extreme violence between Christians and Muslims in Nigeria, to set the context for it, there's still extreme violence there, so much so that we were not able to go and do field work there. I was supposed to go, but it's a level 4 State Department warning to go to northern Nigeria still. So to implement this program is a very, very tense context to understand it. So we had to do interviews and focus group discussions remotely. So really importantly, the program helped bring new peace building efforts to this really tense region, to religious and ethnic minority communities, to promote increased peace and stability in this really highly volatile country. Next, I worked on a program in Sri Lanka, and this is with National Democratic Institute, that was focused on improving openness and transparency in Parliament. Again, we were supposed to go to Sri Lanka 6 months prior to this, but there was essentially a soft revolution that was happening in the streets, so we had to pause the evaluation. Protesters and students were in the streets calling for, a near overthrow of the government. They were calling for this dismissal of Parliament. And it became really crucial for elected leaders to become more transparent to their people. So this program, you think about it, this very, very small investment for foreign, it's from USAID, but other governments, to help with democracy and transparency of the Sri Lankan government. The program specifically was helping making parliamentary debates open to the public, as well as making national budget policies open for public discussion and allow citizens to comment. This is revolutionary in a lot of countries. Most countries, or I shouldn't say most, I don't know what the proportion is, but in a lot of countries, the leadership doesn't necessarily debate the national budget in an open way for people to comment, let alone have debates that are open for the public to be aware of. This program brought in civil society groups into Parliament, so brought in women, brought in youth groups, brought in persons with disabilities to really connect for the first time with Parliament, so really address the needs of the people at that time. Finally, going on to Ethiopia. This is a USAID funded project, again, implemented by the National Democratic Institute. And the program trained civil society groups to become election monitors. Prior to this program, only foreign observers had ever observed and monitored Ethiopia's elections. The program trained, so meaning it had been it had been foreign observers, it had been delegations from the European Union or outside of Ethiopia, but never before had Ethiopians monitored and observed their own elections. They didn't have the infrastructure for it. They didn't have the professional reporting capabilities. They didn't have the know-how of how to observe and how to monitor their own elections. So this trained these leaders on how to do it. The program trained civil society groups to monitor violence against women, specifically during elections, and also improve access for voting rights to minority ethnic groups, persons with disabilities, and internally displaced people to be able to vote at mobile election sites for the first time. It was a really exciting part of it because when I was there, you'll see a theme. There was I guess a near civil war with the Tigray region right before, the year before. So to have access for internally displaced people to be able to vote is a really, really important part of the democratic process in a lot of countries. This type of program can help stability in a country by improving citizen confidence in election monitoring and the overall democratic process. All right, so that gives you examples of what they're doing. And then this is where I want to focus the rest of my talk of the why. What is the reason behind this? What is the purpose? Well, as I talked about in the opener, it's these three ideas. It's humanitarian goodwill. That although it's more than charity, this is a real critical aspect of foreign aid. It's economic ties. And then finally, we will examine the security motivation to give democracy and human rights assistance. All right, so first, I don't want to scoot over this or make it sound like it's not a critical aspect of it, but the humanitarian goodwill part of foreign aid, did you need my attention? Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were here. When cutting out USAID's budget, I'll just quite simply say it, people will die. People will die around the world without this really critical humanitarian assistance. So again, many, 311 million people are relying on humanitarian assistance for their daily survival. Clean water, food assistance, and really basic health care. Okay, so let's put that as kind of the fundamental foremost. And then the economic ties and motivation. I think this is the part where, especially maybe for your more realist leaders, your more hawkish leaders, this is such a critical driver and motivation of why it's in a country's own interest. It's in Australia's interest to give economic aid to Papua New Guinea or to surrounding countries. Why? Because sustainable development creates stronger economies. In the USAID context, they say, part of the USAID mission, quote, states that, quote, our mission is to partner and end extreme poverty and to promote resilient, democratic societies while advancing our security and prosperity. So I want to focus on that last part there. Think of this last clause, advancing our security and prosperity. So for context, 95% of the world's consumers live outside of the United States, outside of the United States borders. Half of US exports are now going to middle and low income countries. Foreign aid has laid the groundwork for mutually beneficial trading relationships. As an important figure, 11 of America's top 15 trading partners were once recipients of US foreign aid. I'm gonna say that again, I think it's so powerful. I just looked this up. I was actually astonished it was that many. 11 of the United States' top 15 trading partners were once recipients of US foreign aid. So the economic motivation and driver is that economic development directly improves the lives of people around the world and in the United States. Foreign aid and economic assistance promotes a thriving international economy that serves our shared interests. Okay, so I hope that gives you, the argument, the motivation, the economic motivation, if nothing else, of why foreign aid is important. And last, I'm going to end on the, as far as the 3 reasons of the why, the security interests. And my talk is foreign aid, democracy, and security. So I want to tie in this third part here. That human rights, democracy, governance, assistance directly impacts long-term global security. And I will walk through this by looking at 3 ideas here. Foreign aid, democracy, and human rights assistance helps prevent violent extremism. It helps preventing mass migration, and it can help prevent civil war or regional instability. So I invite you to think through the places that I referenced and recently worked in. So now I'm going to take through these arguments with where I was. So let's look at Nigeria, and let's look at preventing violent extremism. So what happens if and when this foreign assistance is cut and fails to address women, peace, and security, or peaceful dialogue between Christians and Muslims? And again, this is actually a picture here of this program where women are getting more involved in the women, peace, and security agenda. They're creating it in these local areas in Nigeria. So what happens when you remove this? Well, there's potential for increased communal violence again. Christians and Muslims can start killing each other at alarming rates again. And also, as a reminder, this is the region where the terrorist group Boko Haram comes from. If the state fails to provide basic services and rule of law, Boko Haram thrives. Youth and millions of people become unemployed and resort to extremism if the state and security forces fail to meet their needs. Thus, addressing human rights and democracy helps with stability and preventing violent extremism. Ethiopia. And now I want to talk through preventing mass migration. So again, in the program context I was just in Ethiopia. Democracy assistance helps prevent mass migration. The stability, let's talk through this in this Ethiopian context. The stability of Ethiopia impacts the entirety of East Africa. If there's more ethnic violence in Ethiopia, this leads to more displaced people and refugees fleeing to Kenya and Tanzania and other surrounding countries. So instability leads to decreased security, where then refugees are forced to leave their homes, villages, and countries really to escape violence. It's a very simple, or not simple, but it's a very clear correlation. When people are in increased violence or lack stability in their communities, they leave. So it creates mass migration. So this program, and then in general, and I don't mean to simplify my context and my program context. I'm not saying this program led to the lack of revolution in Sri Lanka. This is decades of work. This is long-term, sometimes generational change. But it's this investment from foreign assistance that helps move the dial, that helps with these long-term changes in democracy and human rights. All right, and then let's end on Sri Lanka, where this is an example of potentially foreign democracy assistance. I go as far as to say to help prevent a revolution, a full-out revolution in Sri Lanka a couple years ago. This assistant provided timely and critical methods for Parliament to address the acute needs of the people. It allowed them to hear the voices of the people and prevent further violence. It opened their parliamentary debates and brought citizens into the process. And it would show that clearly the stability of one country impacts the immediate stability of the economic stability and the security of the entire region. Think through India and Bangladesh, really impacting the security of the whole region. All right, so I hope those three ideas were clear of preventing violent extremism, preventing mass migration, and preventing, potentially civil war and regional instability through this funding. All right, then I thought to add this for context, because I think just part of history is so important to remember. We are now going to look at long-term benefits of foreign aid and look at these case studies. I want to call attention to Germany and Italy, as well as Japan and South Korea. So I think when the general public hears foreign aid, especially humanitarian assistance, maybe in your mind images of say an Ethiopian child in a famine comes to mind. But I invite your imagination to go back to Europe after World War II. And let's look at Germany and Italy. It was utterly destroyed, economic disarray after World War II. With the Marshall Plan, kind of the predecessor to USAID and foreign assistance, massive amounts of foreign assistance and investment, these countries were able to rebuild. Now, Germany is the largest economy in Europe, and Germany and Italy are on the top list. If you remember that list in the beginning, they're on the top list of foreign aid donors who also have vibrant democracy with robust civil society now. Turning to Japan and South Korea, again, Japan bombed, devastated after World War II, with high amounts of foreign investment to their economic and political infrastructure. Japan is now the fourth largest economy globally, also with a robust democracy. And South Korea, I recently was in South Korea. It's like being in the future. It's like, it makes me jealous. How do we not have this? Their bus stops, their healthcare, their infrastructure. This was, again, to remind, especially right after the Korean War, huge investments in foreign aid helped invest in South Koreans' reconstruction and development to promote economic growth, support social programs, and democratic development. So South Korea is now a powerhouse. It shifted from becoming a recipient of foreign aid to now it's a significant donor of foreign aid with a vibrant democracy, media, and civil society. So I really want to put this in your head. Let's remember, yes, there are problems with USAID's efficiency or outcomes, but these are four pretty clear examples, and yes, there was other impacts. I'm not distilling it all down to foreign investment, but these are really great examples of what are long-term benefits and case studies where we can clearly see the development of these societies. All right, so I want to end with a couple of quotes and also a reminder that this is not at all, is never been connected to a political party. In the United States, it goes between Democrats and Republicans. This has been a bipartisan issue. Foreign assistance has been a bipartisan issue pretty much since its founding. So I want to quote our leaders here. From Barack Obama, he said, "Development is not charity. Development isn't charity. It's one of the smartest investments that we can make in our shared future, in our security and prosperity." George Bush said, and by the way, for this context of George Bush's quote, he, under his leadership, gave the largest amount of HIV/AIDS assistance in the world in history that still existed as of a few weeks ago. So George Bush, again, Republican, says, "When you have an entire generation of people being wiped out and the free world turns its back, it provides a convenient opportunity for people to spread extremism. It's in our national security interest, as well as in our moral interest, to continue funding this program, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief." And finally, Condoleezza Rice. She says, "For the United States, supporting international development is more than just an expression of our compassion. It is a vital investment in the free, prosperous, and peaceful international order that fundamentally serves our national interest." All right, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that talk. If there are questions, please raise your hand. And Dr. Rainer is going to field the questions on her own up there, and I am going to field the questions from our online audience. And so every once in a while I might pop in just with a comment or a question from online. But if there are questions in the room, please.
Is it? Oh, is that
There's
yes.
Noise from
Somebody shy or yes, please. Yeah.
So one of the things that I've been thinking about here at my time in Honolulu is what can we do, the collective we, I guess, in this case, to make the impact of our foreign assistance overseas more readily available and understandable to the American public. Because I do think that there's been some maybe misinformation campaigns that have existed for a while that has been detrimental to this cause. And I know for the State Department, we suffer from that too, because we don't have a necessarily built-in domestic constituency. We mostly concentrate on overseas. Mm-hmm. So I'd be interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's really tricky, and I have a lot of friends who at USAID that say exactly that. We don't have a constituency in the U.S. It is pretty abstract what people in USAID and the State Department does. So I do not have a current answer. I think this is one of the challenges, but also beyond the scope. It's not a Ministry of Foreign Affairs job to sell its work to its own people. That's the who would that be? That's the leaders. I mean, you look at internationally, the Swedes don't do that. The Germans don't do that. I think they have a more educated populace to understand what's the purpose of this. Why is it important to have improved democratic governance in Romania or in other EU countries? There's a more understanding of the economic drivers, of the humanitarian drivers. So it's never been my focus to focus on the US population, domestically, but this talk, is kind of like, let's get back to this. Let's have a public forum on what are we losing here? What's the purpose? This is not just charity. This is in our own security and prosperity's interest. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have maybe a follow-up from online.
Mm-hmm.
And the audience member was referring back to your discussion of South Korea and Japan. And they say that some people would question why the US taxpayer dollars are spent abroad and not invested at home. And so, again, how do we justify foreign aid to American communities that have been left behind economically? So this question of whether or not I think there's two parts here, whether or not foreign aid is actually connected to, maybe economic social safety nets in the United States, and if so, how, right? Like, so are we talking apples to apples? Are these things comparative? Is there more from one bucket and that snatches from this one, or how, is there a better way or more fruitful way for us to think about this?
No, that's a really important question. I used to work on the human rights reports of the State Department, and they've been going on for decades. They're the largest reporting on human rights in the world as far as actual documentation, but then as far as also length of time. I would have to then go to Jordan and Morocco and then meet with our foreign counterparts, and they would say, "Who are you, United States, to talk about our human rights abuses?" It felt very self-righteous. That was often that conversation. And those diplomatic dialogues would be often along the lines of, this is not we've solved it here, therefore we're going to now tell the world what to do. Every country struggles with violence against women. Every country struggles with the actual implementation of freedom of expression. So similarly, it's not an either or conversation. Yes, we still have, homelessness, food insecure children in our own country, and we are the wealthiest country in the world in history. So it's policy reform domestically, while at the same time, we should still be giving support to war-torn societies like Sudan. We are seeing the largest humanitarian crisis since World War II. So it's in our own long-term interest to pay attention, while of course still providing for our own country and our own society.
Other questions from the room? Okay, I have more questions online if there are none, but if there's a question, go ahead.
I have a question about the strong narrative of the development society you mentioned in South Korea. So I'm wondering if that kinds of a strong narrative, we achieved this development as once we were recipients, but now we are donor, the powerhouse. So is there but you also mentioned other countries like Germany, Italy, and Japan. And I'm wondering if those other countries have the similar types of self-understanding or national narrative of the development. Okay, maybe I need to add some more explanation. So this kind of narrative has become, in South Korea, this kind of narrative has become deeply ingrained in South Korea's national identity and resonates strongly with its sense of self and worth. However, it also sparks controversy, particularly regarding the developmentalism, which sometimes some argue has undermined the democracy in South Korea right now. So given that South Korea is not the only nation to make this economic shift, so I would like to ask, do similar strong developmental narratives or sentiment in countries like Germany, Japan, and Italy? Yeah, that's my question.
That's a really complicated question. I'm guessing you know more about the South Korean context than I do. I'm more of a generalist, but looking at the topic of democracy and human rights in a lot of countries. I hear what you're saying, that it's a national identity and a narrative that's strong in South Korea. And I think maybe a difference, I'm putting Japan, South Korea more kind of regionally together, and then Germany and Italy together. But I would say probably those three countries Japan, Germany, Italy do not conceptualize themselves as developing with a development narrative, and haven't for a while, because they're wealthy. They're high income countries that South Korea is emerging into. But for Germany, I mean, I just think it's so important for people to remember. Germany was in absolute devastation. Italy was in ruins. And now they're on the top 5 list of country donors, setting the agenda in the European Union. I know we have a European Union expert here too. Setting, what should we be funding? Germany now supports LGBTI foreign policy, is looking into a feminist foreign policy. All of this is in flux. But they definitely they're high income countries. And so South Korea, it's just so phenomenal. I think it's so exciting to be there and go experience it, of this is what foreign investment can become, with strategic public policies. So I think more the point I'm getting at here is, I'm not an expert in South Korean society, not speaking necessarily to the domestic narrative. I'm speaking to the justification for the public audience of understanding, okay, maybe this is where Kenya can get to. That it won't always be a foreign assistance receiving country. Maybe Ghana, with its economy on the rise, will soon be a donor country to its neighboring countries. Right? This is the point of, I think people get so mired in how much money has gone to Haiti, how much money has gone to Ethiopia, and maybe they struggle to see tangible outcomes of that. So it's important to look at other case studies where you can really see tangible outcomes in South Korean investment from foreign aid.
Before our time is closing in on us, but I still have a couple of different questions from online. One is, and more coming up. Okay, so one is the short one, right? Someone brings up this question of, if the U.S. establishment was operating business as usual, what would the U.S. response to the recent Myanmar-Thailand earthquake have looked like, given the ongoing civil war in Myanmar?
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking, especially for humanitarian assistance. Where the United States, we were first and we were biggest. To summarize it quickly and simply, do you remember that when there's a typhoon, when there's any sort of natural disaster, the U.S. quite simply has the global capacity that is no other country can parallel what we can do fastest with the most money. We'll come into a war-torn area where there's an earthquake or a natural disaster. Within 24 hours, there was an office in USAID called OTI. Oh no, what did that stand for? Office of Transitional. Yeah.
OTA, maybe?
Yeah. So I'm forgetting, I'll know the acronyms more sometimes than what they stand for. But basically, there was an emergency response unit.
Transition Initiatives. Office of Transition Initiatives.
Thank you. And no other country that I know has the same infrastructure or kind of global reach that the U.S. still has. We still have it, but we're dismantling it right now.
Okay. So earlier, the first question that came in actually was thinking about it. It references actually one of your slides, slide 3 or 4. It says, with a breakdown of U.S. foreign assistance categories, and peace and security account for 14.2%. And so this question asks about, first of all, as I understand, this category includes funding provided and or delivered by the Department of Defense for strengthening foreign security sectors, including militaries and law enforcement agencies. Can you speak more about how the aid community regards this kind of funding? Does it conflict with broader USAID objectives? So that question, I think, of defense or policing expenditures and foreign aid, sort of the connection.
I was gonna, thank you for that question. I was gonna go back to that slide. Am I no longer able to? I should be able to, okay. Maybe the cursor's over here. Because, let's pull it up. Because this is actually, it's a good question. And what is really, really difficult about measuring a lot of this, here it is that this is foreign assistance spending. And sometimes it's categorized as humanitarian aid. Sometimes it's women, peace, and security. Well, is that defense spending? This is USAID. It's from foreignassistance.gov. And so I heard in the question, does it contradict with what U.S. Department of Defense? This is mainly USAID spending.
Okay, I think the question was about the category of peace and security.
Right.
And the questioner understands or believes that this includes funding funding delivered by the Department of Defense for strengthening foreign security. And is that, first of all, maybe that's not the case.
I don't think this is the case. This is from the Pew Research Center, but again, sometimes it gets cross-cutting where it's like, is it a democracy program when, say, it's providing beds to prisons to meet international human rights standards for treatment of prisons? That can sometimes, it can come from multiple pots. This is not Department of Defense spending. This is 71 billion. If it was Department of Defense spending, it would be much, much, much higher. Unfortunately. But I am not, I didn't focus my talk on the peace and security part. That's not my area of expertise necessarily. But again, the cross-cutting issue, I was focusing mainly on this 3.2% of the democracy, human rights, and governance, but that is where funding for the Nigeria project came from. A woman, peace, and security project. So it does get messy. It's like, is a climate change one? Is it humanitarian assistance, or is it good governance? When there's corruption on who has land rights. These societies are complicated, and so sometimes parsing out foreign assistance is really difficult.
Thank you so much. We have another question, and I will ask you that perhaps afterwards. We have some refreshments upstairs in room 319, the Tokyoka room, and I'd like to thank Dr. Rainer for her talk. I'd like to thank the Department of Asian Studies for co-sponsoring this reception afterwards. But thank you, and we'll have more time to ask more questions upstairs.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.